Before we begin, there are a few technical items to note. We have simultaneous interpretation available. To select your preferred language, you will find a globe icon at the bottom of screen for the interpretation, which you can use to select the language you'd like to listen to.
We have simultaneous interpretation or translation available at the moment. So all you have to do is click on the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a globe icon, and you can click on French or English, whichever language you prefer.
If you have any difficulties with the interpretation, closed captioning, or any other technical issues, please reach out to us in the chat and we'll do our best to help resolve them as quickly as possible. I'm Solange Mudahogora, the ICN National Program Manager. On behalf of the ICN, I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar.
I also would like to say that I'm at the ICN Manager. We work on international cooperation. This is a council that fights and struggles for social justice and social change around the world. It represents over 350 organizations from civil society, diverse organizations across the country from coast to coast. We are leaders in the public sector, and we offer a national platform that for our council to share ideas and improve practice and share practices for collective action and public engagement. If you would like more information, please look on our website and follow us on your social media.
Finally, before we delve into today's contents, we would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar in Mi'kmaq. This is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, Mi'kmaq, Lasaquayak, Malasit, and Passamaquoddy peoples, first signed with the British Crown in 1726. We ask that we all consider this and the land on which we work as we participate in today's webinar. We feel it's important to keep this in mind and know and honor the land that we are on. The ICN works with many communities across Canada, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, as well as communities around the world in international development sector. And we feel it's important to reflect on this, draw lessons from our colonial history, and how this history intersects in many ways with the issues we are facing today in working towards a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. I invite you to use the chat to introduce yourselves, where you are joining from, and comment on today's topic. Any harmful, disrespectful, or inappropriate language or comments will not be tolerated. You may also use the Q&A function later to address any question to the speakers. We will start with an introduction of the speakers, then we will hear from the panelists, and end with a Q&A session. Today's webinar will be moderated by Sydney Pigot.
Sydney is a social impact leader, researcher, advocate for gender equity and social justice on a global scale. She's currently a senior social impact manager at Shopify, where she champions education programs for underrepresented youth in tech and entrepreneurship with partners all around the world. Before joining Shopify, she held a leadership position at Elevate and YMCA Canada. She's also a member of Equal Futures Network Advisory Committee and Reach Alliance Advisory Council. Sydney has been a subject matter expert at several international forums, including the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, the Women Deliver Conference, Inter-Parliamentary Union Conference for Young Parliamentarians, and RightsCon. She brings an intersectional feminist lens to all her work, informed by her proud Afro-Caribbean heritage. Sydney, over to you.
Thank you so much, Solange, for the introduction, and welcome to everybody here. I'm joining you from the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, a traditional territory near to San Jose, California. We're going to run a quick poll right now so that you can give a little bit of background for the panelists to work with. You should be able to see a pop-up on your screens. Please answer the question so that we can interact with everybody in the audience today. I'll give you a couple minutes to answer the question, which is, what social media platforms do you use? Great. And while you're answering that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our incredible panelists today. We have 3 panelists who are going to be going through this discussion with us. Nelson Kwadje is a South Sudanese technologist and human rights campaigner with over 7 years of experience in information and communication technology and digital rights advocacy. He founded Alela Technologies, a company that provides governments, enterprises, and nonprofit organizations with technological solutions for process efficiency, human capital development, visibility, and digital storytelling. Nelson is the chairperson of Defy Hate Now in South Sudan, an organization that focuses on promoting digital rights and creating a framework for increasing trust between stakeholders and communities in Africa through mobilizing civic action against all forms of hate speech, misinformation, human rights violations, and incitements to violence. Nelson is listed among the 100 most influential young Africans in the year 2020. We also have Karine Gentelet. Karine is an associate professor in the Department of Social Sciences at the Université du Québec en Outaouais. She is also the scientific director of Sierra UCO, Centre Interuniversitaire d'Études et de Recherche Autochtone at UCO, and the scientific director for civil society collaborations at Obvia, the International Observatory on the Societal Impacts of AI and Digital Technology. Her research interests and publications focus on the impacts of artificial intelligence on social justice and the recognition of human rights, particularly those of Indigenous peoples, as well as research ethics in Indigenous contexts and the social responsibility of researchers. This fall, Les Presses de l'Université de Laval will be publishing a book edited by Gentelet entitled Les intelligences artificielles au prisme de la justice sociale, or Considering Artificial Intelligence Through the Lens of Social Justice. Finally, Michel Lambert is the general manager at Equality, a Canadian organization with a mission to develop open source technology aiming at protecting online rights. Michel is engaged in various initiatives supporting civil society organizations' rights to engage securely over the internet. He has launched several projects using technologies, starting from the Quebec Centre for Alternative Media in 2000, civil society internet portals in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2002, and in the Maghreb Mashrek in 2007. More recently, he contributed to launching Lab Delta. Active on issues of international solidarity, Michel was the president of the Quebec Association for International Cooperation, or ACOSI, from 2017 to 2020. Previously, he was a member of the board of directors for Food Secure Canada, Alliance Syndicate Tiers-Monde, and the International Council for the World Social Forum. Welcome to these incredible panelists. I feel so humbled to be among all of you. So to start the discussion, we're going to go through a few questions, and I'm also going to make sure to get the audience involved by having them answer the questions. As a reminder, we'll be going back and forth between English and French, so make sure that if you have your interpretation on, if you require it, that you have it available. I'm going to pass it off to Nelson first. Our first question is, what gaps do you see emerging tech helping to fill in our work within the international cooperation sector?
Okay, thank you for the kind introduction, and to be humble to be in such a multilingual, multi-ethnic and multinational. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'm using my phone. So, as I said, I'm humbled to be in such a forum. What gaps does technology help in kind of fulfilling, especially in such a... I work primarily in South Sudan and other conflict-affected areas. So my work is on the intersection of technology and human rights. And I've been primarily working in conflict-affected regions, so Ethiopia, Cameroon, South Sudan, and also Sudan. And I usually focus on what is the impact of I'm sorry, I think my phone just keeps tripping, but now it should be fine. I mainly focus on the impact of social media in this conflict, either at times in um, exacerbating an already dire situation, or at times it also amplifies already existing inequalities in terms of access to technology and access to resources. So that has been kind of primarily my work. And over the last few years, the past 3 years or so, with the COVID-19 pandemic and what, it has also introduced for us new realities. And we can see there are a lot of gaps that technology kind of comes and helps, especially in my area of work. Most of the time we find that technology is very good in helping the youth in accessing resources in the part of the world where I work at. We recall very well at the onset of the pandemic that a lot of universities and a lot of companies have either zero rated or opened their curriculums and a lot of their resources to people from all across the world. And that can, with the technology, it helped a lot of people access education and access resources that otherwise they were not able to do. And also in this part of the world, we also see technology is kind of like taking people who otherwise wouldn't have been highlighted and bring them into the front row and at times to the global stage with a speed and velocity that wouldn't have been imaginable a few years ago. I mean, being in this webinar is a testament to this. I'm joining you from Juba, South Sudan. So we can find technologies also like opening up this, making the world kind of come together and opening up and giving platform to a lot of people. Albeit most of the time it just happens as what you call trending. So it doesn't happen in a scale that is sustainable, that is able to uplift communities and the rest. But it's really what the tech and what the attention span of social media determines at the moment, and that can kind of bring someone into the front. I wish that technology can be the equalizer that people has hoped that it will be, but I think it will take time for that to happen. Just finally, let me underscore something on human rights, and I think that's a very important point. You find that we have issues of human rights that otherwise it would have been taken years to investigate previously. You see the atrocities that happen in Ethiopia. People now are using open source intelligence and open source investigation. In Sudan currently, there is a mission that the human rights investigation program that primarily uses open source and citizen journalism to investigate atrocities and to document. And a lot of the citizens are able to document these atrocities, and probably in areas that no journalist and no human rights mission will be able to step foot in. And I think that is a new, the technology is still very, also it doesn't have the same abilities as sending investigators on the ground, but we can see that it is holding perpetrators to account and also bringing highlight to the global community in a manner that is also helping us in achieving a lot of gains. Let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Nelson, for those helpful reflections. Je vais passer la parole à Karine maintenant.
So now I'm going to pass it over to Karine. I'm going to repeat the question in French. So what are the gaps that you see in emerging tech helping to fill your work within international cooperation sector. So thank you so much for the invite. I'm so happy to be here. So what Nelson already said, talking about documenting, supporting, documenting human rights and abuse of human rights is a very clear spot where emerging technology can be helping. It also shows that people can have a direct impact using just their phone, their smartphone, to be autonomous and hear what's happening and share what's happening in terms of human rights around them. What also I wanted to say is the fluidity of social interactions are really facilitated. We saw with the pandemic, we heavily relied on these new technologies. And this is something that can really bring a lot of progress. Also, I work a lot with Indigenous communities, and we're seeing technology allows for them to have interactions that can really hold up to the cultural context, and also talking about language issues. We're talking about epistemology and how to use that, because it's different than the dominant epistemology. We'll talk about that later, but talking about dematerializing interactions and how that is something that is very important. This also can help us reach communities that are geographically, that are maybe really more remote, so very far north. That's what we say in English, is remote communities. And what we see in what's trending in human rights issues right now, it's really the networking aspect. So what's happening within a country or also on an international level, so information can be shared way easier. Then we can go deeper into what are the issues behind that information sharing, because there's a cost to everything, but we'll go into it more later. Thank you, Karine. So I saw, Michelle, that you were reacting a little bit. So do you have some other ideas to share on this question? Well, so first of all, I'd like to say thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for, I am happy, always happy to be in this network and be speaking with all of you. I spent a lot of my career in this network. So I just want to say hi to everyone from ECOC. I've worked with you for a long time. So thank you. So what are some of the barriers or the gaps? So we're talking about, and one of the gaps is networking that the technology can fill. So we can speak better with people across different distances and just speak together more often. Catherine was speaking about the cost. So, and one of the costs that I think about right away is using technologies that are these dominant technologies, and that can't use them in security, right? We don't know what happens to our data. Is it monetized? Who's watching us? Are they collecting it? What is it being used for? So in the work we do lots of technological development to offer services that are similar to what already exists, but have principles that will respect people's privacy of who's using it. So to put it into place a system that doesn't have any commercial or capitalist desires before it. It doesn't want to data mine. It doesn't want to use people's data to make money. So to give you a concrete example of what we've done, let's say in Ukraine, there's lots of people who are waiting or assuming that the situation would make it so the internet wouldn't work anymore. The internet would just totally fall down. The Ukrainian internet is they have lots of different internet providers. We only have 4 or 5 here. They have thousands. So it's helping with their internet resilience. However, but to be prepared, we created municipal level servers that would be autonomous, that could give all different kinds of connectivity services. So people who would be working and organizing on the ground there, and that would allow if there was a situation where the international internet was cut off from people in Ukraine. So from, you know, if they just want to communicate from a house to house or a neighborhood or a city to city, it doesn't have to come through Montreal. So it's to have local dedicated servers so they could still have localized internet and communication from city to city. And it was also something that helped us think that this kind of way of setting up internet with local servers could be good and work in other countries. So the technology helps a lot of things, especially networking. But what is important to think about is what are the businesses and the companies behind these technologies? And so we want to be more autonomous. Another question or something that I think is important to mention all the time in the domain that I work in, we are often asked to do trainings. So trainings on new technologies, especially in terms of cybersecurity or security with your information, because a lot of times people don't maybe have a background in this, so could share too much information. They could put themselves in risk, and especially in international solidarity networking, we change personal information, important files, and financial information. So we need to keep this safe. So people have to be trained in cybersecurity. And one of the difficult things is often organizations in the north are not well equipped to do this. We want our southern partners to know how to encrypt their information, but I can count on one hand the groups that are actually able to do that. So thank you, Michelle. As you said, it brings us to another question, and this time I'm going to start up with Karine. So what we were talking about, the gaps, now we wanted to think, so using new technology in international solidarity works, what are some barriers? So we talked a lot about AI, artificial intelligence. So we wanted to go. So that's mostly what I work on. So barriers, obstacles. My two colleagues brought them up. And so then we can talk about technical issues and technology issues. So digital literacy, adequate equipment, strong and stable enough internet. Those are big barriers. Those are to get your foot in the door. Those are important. And then we also have seen different tools. Let's say power balance or imbalance when we talk about one industry, let's say from the global north, and uses tools either they're really easy, and maybe I'm making a bit of a stereotype, but then there winds up being issues of like actual tools, data sets, etc., that are not shared globally. They don't apply and can be worked in local contexts. So when we talk about really the power balance or imbalance, we know these tools are usually created and shared by industry giants. So groups that are rich and powerful. And let's say in Canada, what we see with Meta right now, and that's a rich people's problem, right? And there's other places, there's a problem with just like access to internet and access to information. So these issues about power imbalance is a huge barrier because it's very unequal power distribution. Another barrier that concerns me a lot, or let's say the power, like relationships to powers, and we talk about the big industry heads, and then the people who use those technologies, or the different groups that use these things in their especially the minority desires of certain of these groups. We also see that there's a social fragmentation that's starting. So why these tools are used, where they're spread to, all these questions, it creates this social fracturation, and it can have in the long term a play on international solidarity and solidarity in general. Often we feel there's lots of women researchers who do these studies, and they'll see how people are marginalized, groups that are marginalized are even more marginalized, pushed further and further. So the marginalized groups are more marginalized. That happens within countries, but then also at an international solidarity level as well. And we see that these groups of people, these populations, are really literally taken out of the system and they become totally invisible. And that is a huge problem in terms of barriers. Another barrier that I had so much honor to do in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, it was creating a type of epistemology and something that was just being set upon them. So there's all these that were used that are created from a colonial context that basically try to change this imposed narrative that's been more and more imposed. So it's like, this is the epistemology of the models and how they're all developed in the global north. They have the potential or the risk to invisibilize or erase other emerging epistemologies just because it won't be shared. So that's if it's a cultural level, political, or social level. Those are things that we're seeing could happen more in the future. So thank you so much, Karine. I'm worried we lost Nelson at the moment. I think he will come back and join us as soon as he can. Michelle, do you have ideas or other things to add about the different barriers or implementation and using these different technologies? Michelle, sorry, we don't hear you right now. You're still muted. So as I was saying, to just run with what Karine was saying, one of the issues is really important, which is globally internet speaking. So it's a question of language. So what's happening? So you have your website. So you have your North American characters or your Western world's characters. So even in French, it's difficult because you can't like put an accent, right, in your website or anything. So that is even difficult for us. And what we're seeing in statistics, there's a number, I don't know how many people, but it was just like the people who will connect to the internet, the new people, the people that don't use English or the other Western world languages. So Lycan is an institute that looks at universal acceptance to be able to use other languages on the internet, but at the moment it's really at a voluntary level, so it's up to the users to set it up, and it depends on the programs. So that's a huge obstacle we have to see with language, so that the tools that are used, shared, and the internet itself can be used in people's own languages. So even we're talking about where we are in Indigenous languages, is they're almost not able to be used on the internet or be found on the internet. There's people that are working on it right now, but it has so far to go. And we're thinking about different groups in the north. It's still huge obstacles. There's not a lot of organization and good politics in international solidarity networks to really work on internet security. And so in Akasi, that I heard it was mentioned, but just really to put the resources and the worker power behind. So if we don't have proper policies, we are going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes with people's sensitive data. We won't know. And so we are really exposing our network to attacks. We're just hoping that we won't have problems, but I don't think that's the best approach at all.
Merci beaucoup, Michelle. Nelson, I'm going to pass it to you, but I'll repeat the question in English just so that you have it here. What barriers do you anticipate in the use of new technology in the international solidarity work?
Thanks. I've seen my two colleagues have already really stated some of the fundamental points on this, underscoring issues of internet access, cost, and kind of like the way that the whole internet is skewed towards people who speak English, who kind of are primarily male and are primarily also like living in the in the West. So these are all, and one thing probably like, maybe I can probably say 2 pointers that I've kind of 2 important issues. The question of inequality in the internet is something that, at times people say like the newer technologies will kind of make it equal for different groups. But we find that some of these technologies already worsen an existing reality. And we can see this happens with AI, with the rest and what, because people already had a head start. And majority of the people who design these technologies are by default inclined towards themselves. Not that they are inherently selfish, but it's just like they don't know anything else. And that's why you find that like some of the widely spoken languages are not the first to get the release of certain technologies on. They have to be interpreted too. And that is a question about where's the center of the world. So we find that the center of the world is where these technologies exist. And so you find that the accessibility of it is not easy. And the second question is a question of design. And that's also a very important problem, design and incentives. And I think I had these discussions with Meta and some of these technology companies a lot. You find the issues that we experience with technologies, some of these barriers, especially when it comes to existing bias or promoting and incentivizing certain type of toxic behaviors, whether this is hate speech, misinformation, digital addiction to digital content and all this stuff. Whenever we face these problems, this is a problem. These technologies are inherently designed to incentivize certain type of behavior and push the optimization towards that. Whether this behavior implies that you have to be on your phone from morning to evening to cultivate your attention, whether this behavior implies that they have to make you impulsively buy a certain type of product or push for your product that do not kind of appeal to your well-being, or at times make teenagers all look alike and do the same things, but still think that they're different and unique. And that is something this is a question of design and the way capitalism has kind of been put at the center of these technologies. So they optimize and incentivize certain type of behaviors. And this question of kind of existing bias and these questions of like a design that incentivizes a certain type of behavior that is not in line with the well-being and advancing certain human rights agenda continue to be the biggest challenges. Any new technology that comes fits into this. And you can see it with AI, you can see it with the rest, with all these kind of technologies. And for us to change it, it's to go back to some of the questions that Michelle was saying earlier on. How do we create technologies that are built for communities and that are devoid of some of these incentives that have already been built? And I think trying to make communities own up these technologies and trying to find new models for building the cooperation, it's also one of the ways that we can push back and we can kind of create local ownership and create probably like a fairer technology that kind of appeal to some of the things that we have been advocating for.
Amazing. Thank you for your reflections. And it's interesting because I mentioned before, I happen to be in Silicon Valley right now and in the center of the Alphabets and the Metas. And you can tell that these conversations are still really happening on the fringes of those spaces and not in the boardrooms, I guess. So that's why it's important to have these conversations. I'm actually going to go to the audience questions because I think that all three of you have spoken a bit to some of the questions that are here. So I'd love to be able to dive in a little bit deeper. So there's kind of three different categories, but they're all related to, as all the people watching, how can we navigate these spaces, especially with technology changing so quickly and impacting all aspects of our life. So, there's the individual level and in our own life, there's our professional life. And then there's also for leaders who are watching here, how do they help the people in their organizations or in their communities to be able to adapt to these technologies. So if I can combine that all into one question, based on your experiences doing this for a long time, what recommendations would you give to people around the skills that they need to navigate this changing environment and how they can influence or help others through this rapidly changing context? Peut-être je vais commencer avec Michel cette fois-ci.
So Michelle, I'd love to start with you maybe. Well, obviously, being primarily involved with online security matters, my first answer would be that people have to do individual efforts and organizational efforts to make sure that we minimally cover the bases for online security. I think that's a very fundamental step. Secondly, we've already mentioned this as well. I believe transferring to new technologies will not only be a matter of teaching new skills, but it's also undertaking new projects with new partners. We've been launching new online security schools in the countries we're active in. We've been launching 4 to 5 at the time we speak, and they are being independently led. And so as soon as we're done with our work on the local grounds, they don't need us to keep going on with their activities. And we've been trying to implement similar approaches in all the countries we're active in, so that we try to build local capacity to maintain their technologies with other local organizations, so that we are not always stuck in this model where we have to go train them. I'm here this day, here the other day, and there's no continuity. There's no anchoring in the communities that we're working in, and we're making money as consultants, but I think we should be thinking about how to redistribute our knowledge and wealth. And so we are really aiming for local leadership and ownership of the structures, and that's what we try to do all through our programs and activities. Thank you, Michelle. Karine, would you have any comments on this subject? Yes, obviously. I think it's very interesting. I think the advice I would give in terms of technology, specifically AI, is being presented as something very niche, very complex, that needs a specific expertise in order to use it properly. But I think it's important in our current context, where there's a generalized use of AI in our societies, which is relatively new. It wasn't the case maybe 15 years ago. And so it's impacting everybody in their daily lives. We all have objects that are using AI, and it's there in our daily lives now. And so we have to keep that in mind. So first of all, we are our own experts on our own realities and advice, no matter what people are saying. There's a lot of new technologies in AI, and I'm sorry, that's also a critic that I have for Silicon Valley. There are decisions being taken in the name of those who are the first concerned about the use of these technologies. And so there's a question about how will these technologies impact the communities they are being launched in. And so as citizens, we have to be able to say, okay, I feel like there's something wrong here. There's a decision that was made by a private service that was visibly non-beneficial to us. And so we have to be critical and to keep it in our heads that we don't have to be an expert on technology to understand the impacts of these technologies on our daily lives. So that's the first thing. And I would also say, I'm developing a theory that is maybe that could be themed let your voice be heard, where we could have a social movement where we confront our elected members of the government on what they're doing in terms of education and control on these devices and the way they interact in the social groups. And we haven't spoken about intersectionality a lot yet, but I think it's important to mention that we need to care about the profiles, you know, a woman is not a wife, a sister, or mother. She's all those things at once. And these different identities will intersect in a way that can create disparities or oppressive dynamics. And so we're lacking training technically, socially. And one of the things that could be done amongst organizations and governments, it would be to offer training on these social interactions between digital rights and rights to education. They are very intimately tied. If we go back to the time of pandemic, if there wasn't any internet, there wasn't any class. And so we have to understand these interactions as being interconnected. Human rights are tied to digital rights, and digital rights are human rights. And I think as a society, we have to be able to draw these relations and to invest them and confront when there's and ask questions when we feel like something is wrong about the way we use technology, especially about AI. And I think it's a problem because in any society, there needs to be a critical feedback. There needs to be conversation on the tools that we are using and developing as soon as they have such a big impact on everybody's daily lives.
Super intéressant. Nelson, I'll pass it to you. Just a reminder of what the question was from the audience was really what kind of skills do individuals and leaders and organizations need to be able to navigate this context that we're in and these emerging technologies?
Yeah, I think also like in the same manner, like some of these have already been said. I think this French politicians who say like war is too important to be left for the generals. That means it needs more participation from everyone. I think in this case, technologies and AI and the rest, these emerging technologies, they are too important to be left for tech people. Despite the fact that I'm actually someone from a technical background, but you see, like I think at the onset of it, there was a lot of naivety. I mean, you remember that time Mark Zuckerberg came and said like, it will be laughable to think Facebook had any impact on the elections. And then after some time, he said like, okay, maybe we have inadvertently allowed some people to access our data to some extent. And then from there on, it moved to like, okay, I think we apologize for having not put in consideration for all the things that we have built, and then that have led to access to people's data. And I think over time you've seen like this, these companies admitting that there is a lot of problems that is beyond the control of the technologies. And I think from this end, people need to lean in from both sides. I think the people who build the technology need to lean into understanding aspects of human rights and aspects of other issues that involve societies. And also people who are in this business of human rights or even individuals, they also need to lean in to understand technologies. And I don't think when we say lean in to understand technologies, it's for them to be expert in AI. But the same way that when we tell you in your house, you need to understand how not to get shocked by electricity or to drown on water, we don't expect you to be an expert swimmer. But like at the least you can do is not to sink on water. And I think that is what, when we say people should be digital literate, is to be that kind of aware. Parents, you should be able to at least configure the setting for your child so that they have a certain level of privacy, or understand basic digital security. And again, to what Michelle has been saying, understand basic cybersecurity so that you are not kind of duped or being taken advantage of your data, of your privacy and all this. And I think it's also like, it's just like hygiene. When you want to kind of practice hygiene, it's not one thing that you should do, but it's a combination of all the things that you do together that keeps you healthy. And I think that this problem that like, more people say that they care about privacy than they actually do. And that is actually true. People talk about privacy in a manner very, at times, opposite to what they do. So I think that's also a question of kind of developing habits and cultures that can kind of help you to navigate in this kind of digital era. So for us, we try to do that. We try to do that with children at a very young age. So we try to teach them digital security. We try to teach them digital literacy and all that. because times it's very hard to teach an old dog new tricks. But I think with the next generation, we're able to kind of probably have an impact that can create a dent and then have an exponential impact in the future. And I tell people usually try to spend a lot of time with your kids to try to teach them about these things, teach them about the dangers of these technologies, and teach them about the good practices of this, and also how they can take advantage of these technologies in their daily life. Because this way, when they grow up, they'll have a better understanding, and they're less likely to fall victim to some of these issues. I'll stop here.
Amazing. That really resonates with me because I work with children around their digital literacy and digital fluency. So I definitely can see that there's a lot of hope in the next generation, but a lot of challenges. And I think both Michelle and Karine have talked about this. There's issues of trust as well, not just of privacy, and how we're making sure that this is accessible to folks. And I think those comments, everyone's comments kind of led into both the question we had prepared, but also one that came up from the attendees. So I think it would be great to talk about it. And it's around the ethical considerations of emerging technologies. What are those considerations? But also there's a specific question from the audience that's around gig workers within the kind of emerging technologies economy, specifically called out annotators and curators, who are kind of doing this informal gig work within these emerging technologies, and kind of creates a new level, like we've mentioned, of inequality. So that's one of the ethical considerations that we'd love you to talk about, but also anything that's come up in your work around the ethics of emerging technologies. Je pense que je vais commencer avec Karine cette fois-ci.
Karine, I'd love to start with you. Yes, I have seen the question. It's a very interesting one. When I was mentioning that AI is being presented as a super technical thing, and I have even read many comments framing AI as being human and social because they are alike to humans, seeing as they are operated by human participation. And so in the global south, there are people creating categories and content moderation, and so there's nothing magical or artificial in that. It's very much human, and there are workers in extremely precarious conditions that are involved in the production of these AI technologies, especially in the Amazon forests. I will just speak a bit more slowly because I think I was going too fast. So we had this one worker who had mental health issues because of the content he was moderating on TikTok. And for me, this is a social impact. That means that it is a social technology and we can't divorce it from the context in which it's operating, the human context. And in terms of ethics, I think we have gone way beyond conversations on ethics. I'm sorry. I feel like when we are now at the level where we need to think in a social context, in a social spectrum, seeing as AI is so widely used and impacting all levels of society, decision-making, individual lives, we are now at the level where we need to have a conversation that's centered more around policy, frameworks relating to specific incidents. How can we refrain? How can we impose policy? How can we agree on like fixed policy? And it's possible to create ethical work frames, but I think it's also a way to protect developers to have policies and laws that are very clearly expliciting what we can do and what we can't do. Because one of the things we haven't mentioned a lot so far, and it's also directly linked to human rights, it's cyber surveillance, and there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of information going around, and so with the type of data going around, there's a huge facility in relaying information from one server to the other or one person to the other. And we see when there's a migration crisis, for example, for these people who are in extremely precarious positions, going in between different types of legislations because they're moving across territories, they are the first ones to be impacted by cyber surveillance. And in oppositional regimes, totalitarian regimes are surveilling their enemies, and the meanings of enemies is broadening, especially when we go on social media. And so this context brings us to a next step. We have to go above the ethical conversation and think about regularly regulating and policies and laws. It's already taking place in Europe, but I think it's happening in Canada, but I wouldn't bet on the efficiency of what these procedures are in Canada. It's only my own opinion. It's happening in the United States as well, but we need to go to something a bit more concrete. Thank you. Thank you. I heard Jeff Hilton speak a little bit to AI a few months ago, and I think he was also mentioning that it was too late for him to talk about ethics, and it's really a question of forcing governments to take it more seriously with regulatory statuses and with policies. And seeing as Canada has started developing AI, I think we should be the first ones doing this. So now, Michelle, I'd love to hear what you're thinking. I think this is an extremely interesting debate, AI development and use. I think I'm a bit of a cynic. I have a cynical outtake on this. I was participating in a conversation about this in the Forum on Technology Uses in Canada. It was taking place in Montreal, and there's not a lot of organizations participating in those that are not strictly tech industry led. And so that's what I need to say is we need to have more people getting interested in technology and not only tech experts. And so it's a question of social movements, that how can we open up on these technologies and involve them in our conversations? We were talking about eventually adopting policies or regulation about AI and such technologies. I think it's funny because the concerns of those the most concerned about writing policy are those developing it. And so to me, I feel like we're asking, they're asking us to write policy so they can get a white card and go ahead and do what they want. And I think it's not allowing us to ask the correct questions. I don't have a lot of trust, unfortunately, in our local governments to create something that will be relevant. I was reading again recently the Canadian policy on digital law, and the only thing that is always being put forward is economic opportunities. And so AI would AI is said to have huge limitless revenue opportunities. We're still in a capitalistic world, and so I don't think AI will be regulated in any way that would take into consideration the general welfare of the people and the way individuals work with them. I think what they're going to take into consideration first and foremost are revenues and capitalistic interests. And so I don't have great hope on the developing of adequate policy that would really bring the bad consequences on social organizations to a minimum. I would love to be more hopeful, but I've been waiting for someone to show me that that's possible, and I'm still waiting. Yes, and companies have this argument saying that if we have too much policy or laws about that, we're going to miss the boat on innovation and we're not going to be part of the movement when it kicks off. And so there's a lot of different aspects to these issues, and there's certain voices that are speaking a lot more loudly than others in these conversations.
On this before, but if you have any comments on the ethical considerations of these emerging technologies. And one question from the audience was specifically around the gig economy that emerges from emerging technologies, whether it's curators, annotators, or people who are screening content.
Okay, so I think I'll speak about it from the kind of the African continent perspective. Just like the advent of other technologies, the African continent tend to be like a test ground for some of these things. And that is because majority of the governments here in the region, they either do not have policies that can regulate the frameworks of these things, or at times not just interested in it enough to do that. So we have seen this problem with the workers who are doing this in Kenya, and they have protested, and they formed an association suing Meta and I think OpenAI and the rest of this. But this is also a very difficult kind of conundrum here, because the framework around protecting these workers, I think in a lot of these countries where these things are tested, the framework for protecting all workers is not there, leave alone trying to talk about AI workers. And you find a lot of this work at times is given to university students and to fresh graduates who will be extremely happy to make, I don't know, like $3 or $5 per hour, because they don't have opportunities all anyways. And you can see this with a lot of the young people who are dying in the Mediterranean and all this. There is already like drought, there is already lack of opportunities in these countries. So these people will take these jobs anyway and do them. Before that used to be this job used to be sent to China, to India, and to the Philippines and to the rest. But as the economic situations in these countries improve, this work and this kind of jobs also kind of find their way, because of capitalism, find their way into countries where people will take these jobs without any questioning and all the rest. And that kind of becomes a test ground for this kind of work. So, and unfortunately, this is going to happen. This is bound to happen more. And that is also like very. It is it's a very hypocritical stance from the tech company, because when these tech companies were started, the whole idea was that it was sticking it to the man. These companies are going to from all these economic hardships and all the rest, opening it up. But in the end, these jobs end up becoming even more more oppressive, more demanding, and more capitalistically driven. And I think it comes back to something that I've said in another forum. I think people are not looking for digital or cool jobs. People are just looking for good jobs that can pay them and allow them the opportunity to live a dignified life. And I think for us to be able to hold this, we need to have some form of a universal way of holding this, bringing these workers together and holding a lot of these people accountable. The same way we have universal standards for people who work in the sea or in chemical or in a lot of things. A lot of time people develop international standards to ensure that, to uplift this. Some of these things can come through the UN or through other forums that already exist. At the moment, it is mostly being handled at the peripheries with forums like the Internet Governance Forum, RightsCon, Forum for Internet Freedom in Africa, and also this. But a lot of these forums do not have any, when you look at RightsCon, they have a say, but they don't have any mechanism that is internationally mandating or binding to anyone, or to the companies, to the government, or no one. At best, they can do is shame these companies into compliance. But nothing can go beyond that. But if the more you have international forums that have binding resolutions, or at least resolutions that can have, like what do you see with the GDPR in Europe? The GDPR was put there. It kind of made the EU have a more stronger way of kind of keeping companies accountable. You see now what the EU did with Apple. I mean, you might say like, so what, changing the pin, it's changing the charging port into USB-C. But the cumulative impact of such policies that are kind of aimed at improving competition and protecting consumer go beyond the borders of these countries, and some of the benefits, ripple effects, reach us here in Africa and in the rest. So I think maybe to conclude, I think probably the current frameworks that we have right now for protections are weak. We need more international frameworks that have some binding effect.
Absolutely. And I think what's also interesting around the ethical considerations that everyone brought up a little bit, but we won't dive into today because it would be a tangent. But something I've been really interested in with artificial intelligence is the climate impacts of these technologies, which are, we already know, very intense. They say having one conversation with ChatGPT is like drinking a bottle of spring water. And then also how those climate impacts, not just from the use of those technologies, but also from the widening wealth gap that exists from using these technologies, will reinforce, exactly like you said, the global inequalities that we've seen. And because of the impacts of climate change, will also disrupt other systems that allow people dignified work across the world. So it is a big concern. And I think we don't always realize the levels of ethical considerations that are required when we talk about technology. Just because it's digital doesn't mean that it doesn't have a real footprint, a physical footprint that really impacts people in different ways. So I really appreciate all of your reflections. We have just one more question left, and then I will go back to the audience for further questions. The last one is, what knowledge or insights do we have as a sector, and how should we be using it to inform emerging technologies to be more effective in international solidarity work? I'll start with Nelson, and then I'll pass it over to the other panelists.
Can you just repeat the question for me?
Absolutely. What knowledge and insights do we have as a sector, and how should we be using them to inform emerging technologies to be more effective in international solidarity work?
I think probably like we can start from the obvious ones, the faults and some of the big problems that we've been having, that we had, like I think some of the biggest of them is these issues of mistreatment of workers, issues of election integrity. Most of the times these problems also allow us to open our eyes and develop a kind of a more stringent policies, or at times have a way of handling this. But I think one of the other things is also the frameworks around multi-stakeholder and open communities that are probably emerged from the open source kind of culture, but now it's almost, you can call it open source human rights or open source form of sort. So you can see a lot of these communities, communities of practice around content moderation, around feminism online, protection of women online, fighting against racism and all this. So all these communities exist. And a lot of it is just, at times, is a mailing list with probably like few hundred people who are doing this for free. The most of it is that. And probably at times, at the end of the year, they gather a few dollars and they do a conference or they do an online meeting. But the impact of these groups are very huge. And I think there is so much that has developed around these communities of practice that can be pushed to help us prevent some of the and prevent some of the issues that comes with these emerging technologies. Like issues, like for example, when we look at issues of election integrity, we had a problem with election integrity on social media, especially with disinformation and the rest. But now with AI, we're bound to have the same, especially when you look at image tempering technologies or voice dubbing, or I mean, voice cloning, and what's the other one? Deep fakes. So we can see where this is heading to. We don't need to wait for it to happen, but we can see where this is heading to, especially with voice. I think I'm more afraid of voice than video, because with voice cloning, and to some extent, you even don't know what is real and what is not. And you can imagine in situations of fragility and all the rest, you might have a huge impacts on this. So I think this is the places where we can immediately see the danger, and we can we can prepare in advance for them. And I think I will just probably delve more into election integrity and kind of democratic processes, because that's an area that I work with a lot. But I think with AI, we can definitely see the signs of this. We don't need to wait for the next election or for the next cycle of violence that has been generated as a result of an AI coordinated messaging system that can kind of go and and deceive the public and lead them into committing atrocities or even compromise.
Thank you so much. We actually have a really great question here from the audience, so I'm going to bring it into the discussion. And then also, if you'd like to comment on the previous question, please feel free.
We have a question from Julie. So in terms of AI and digital issues in general, our governments give lots of value to innovation for innovation's sake. So like Michelle was talking about. So there's lots of, are there citizen actions that they can do to encourage digital innovation in terms of a social utility? So I thought Julie's question could interest both Michelle and Karine. So Karine, over to you. It's a really interesting question. I was also trying to listen to what Nelson was saying. I want to try to bring everything together and make some links between what Nelson was saying. But as a sociologist, I don't know how innovation for innovation's sake can move forward. There's no society that has accepted that innovation for innovation's sake. And when we talk about medical research on cloning, right? There was so many advancements, and then eventually the society said, it's like, no, we don't need all of this. There's things that we won't do just because we can. So I think we have to fight against this narrative line, innovation for innovation's sake. We have to have laws that not to like stop innovation, but with the power balances that exist, there should be laws that can control innovation, and just a little bit, because at this time there's nothing. And there's things that are starting up and being put into use, and there's no transparency. And so how do we do this? What is the law? So I'm working on this project Speak Up. So it's like, okay, we have to ask ourselves questions and ask questions. So I'm like, I see something that may not be working. I'm going to ask the question. I'm going to go to my deputy and let him know what's happening as a citizen, and to be like, what is the use of this thing? Is it going to bring us something, this new development? Let's say we have our president of the organization would say like, okay, we bought this, and why are we buying this, and what is it doing it? So that's like your work as a citizen, to go to your elected officials and ask them, why did you get this? Why are you integrating this? Why does this exist? And it's maybe an old issue in Canada. When we talk about cyber surveillance, what does the RCMP use in terms of surveillance? And there's some things that it does, and we don't know. And that's not normal as a society, when we're in a society that's based on respect of rights and a democratic society. So as citizens, we have to push, of myself, and even more so as a sociologist, I think the civil society has a big role to play. We have to do information workshops, etc., to see, be like, what are the positive aspects of emerging technologies, what are the impacts, and what are the negative impacts. And often we don't talk about the negative impacts, and we can't remain silent as a society on those negative impacts. We have to ask for balances. We have to ask. So let's say talking about fracking in a way. So, or in the oil and gas industry, we need the same type of mobilizations that we have with the oil industry around this to get answers from elected officials. And we also need popular education. So what are digital rights? What is AI? What is the impact of AI on human rights? I think that's a really important issue to think about. I don't know if you knew about this. There was a research that just came out on the whole question that the cars that are connected online, they collect information, private, confidential data all the time. And it's specifically integrated, like it happens if you buy these cars. Also those robots that are your vacuums, they use cameras, so then that breaks personal privacy issues. these are basic things that citizens use, and they have to learn this new technology. We have to learn about it. And as everyone's learning to drive a car, you learn the rules of the road. And so it's the same thing. We need education about this new technology, and we have to learn how to have a critical analysis about all of this. Michelle, do you have anything to add or other comments? Yes, there's numerous places that are trying to understand these issues and talking about the internet. So there was the forum of Quebec internet governance, and the next week it will be a more of a global one, and it's been going on for about 20 years, and it helped us mobilize a group of people on a variety of issues, even if it's imperfect still. And one of the principal imperfections, or like, let's say all these bad reasons, so civil society, to really bring up digital questions. They always think it's like only for experts on technology and digital things. So it's like, no, for, let's say, women's rights, it should be women and people who function in that industry to speak about women's rights. But so and this is something, because digital things are everywhere and this technology is everywhere, we have to get involved in these spots. So let's say when the Forum of Internet Governments was created, it was during like there was a climate crisis, but it wasn't in the media, and it wasn't the same as it is now when it was created. And so now, talking about developing internet or developing these tools, we can't talk about them anymore without talking about the climate crisis. So if you do, you're just totally out in left field, and it's not taken serious. So it's going to, these development of new technologies are going to be consuming more energy just for themselves. So it's just the whole same question with the internet. So we have to take these issues into consideration, but we have to physically go to these forums, these places where they're talking about them, to be able to bring these issues, these concerns to the forefront. So before, maybe 20 years ago, we weren't doing it as much, and now we really have to think about this and work on it. And even if I'm working on the technology side, I think the survival of humanity is going to eventually have to go towards this, like basically limiting our digital needs and going more in a simplistic way. So, but I wanted to go back to international solidarity, which is one of the themes of this discussion. So working with a bunch of different international solidarity organizations ask us to have a better digital analysis of their projects. And globally speaking, there is an interest in the technology for international solidarity organizations. However, they do not have a proper education or understanding on all the impacts. So we see, a few years ago, we did a little environmental inquiry to see what's happening about this technology in this country. And so in the proposal, and we're like, oh, we'll just do it this way, and this is how it will work. And so we see that there needs to be a consciousness raising of groups who are working in international solidarity to think about all the digital tools, and to be like, we can't we can't just forget about the environmental impacts, because we don't want to depend on them. We want to share access, but and the groups can be autonomous, but if they're not sustainable tools. So this is a part that's really important, and I think it's a lacking part of lots of international cooperations and solidarity groups, to really see what the role is for this digital technology. And I want to conclude by saying that the Canadian government still is not giving any funding for a digital cooperation. So the rest of humanity has funding dedicated for this, and I don't know what we're waiting for here. Are we just waiting for the train to pass us by? But we are not funding this at all. It's been numerous years that we've been asking for this, and they were promising it, but I don't know what's going on.
Thank you for those comments. That's very interesting. And regarding the question about what we can learn about our sector of international cooperation, is that we can think about things in a more universal, broader way that leads us to understand different aspects that will impact problems around the world. So the fact that we're not only thinking about technologies, data, or digital communications, to also think about individuals, human people. How will they experiment with these technologies? What will the impacts be on their families, on their work, on their climate? I think that's really interesting. And unfortunately, as everybody said, we are a little late in thinking about that now, but we can still change some things with the people in the room right now. We are capable of thinking of all of these experiences and think about ways of bringing some local change by implementing those new technologies.
Is still here. I think I saw him rejoin. But those are kind of the questions that we had for today. I want to make sure that everybody who is on the panel, Nelson, Michel, and Karine, get the last 5 minutes here just to be able to share any information on the work that you're doing and places where people can find more information on what it is that you do. I think that this conversation was kind of just the beginning. And so hopefully people can explore a little bit more of what you're doing. I know that some folks did share notes in the chat, but I'll also pass it over to each panelist to share where they can find more information about the work that you're doing, and even a recommendation maybe for something for people to read or an organization for them to check out. So I'll wait for Nelson to rejoin us, and I'll start with Michel this time.
Un petit peu plus tôt dans le chat, j'ai mis un lien vers
Earlier in the chat box, I sent out a link to our organization's equality. So if you want to go and take a look at that, I'm also going to send 2 other links just now. I think it might be interesting. So this link towards the FLEC, it's a protective infrastructure against DDoS attacks on websites. It's really our baby. It's been 10 years that we're working on protecting websites. We are covering thousands of websites around the world at the time that we're speaking. And so DDoS are cyber attacks that are attacking minorities, marginalized social groups, people who are politically active. So it's always a pleasure to offer this service. We are offering it with a fee for organizations that have budgets and freely to organizations who don't. I could also show you so many other things. We have a lot of projects going on, but the other thing I wanted to mention is this conference that we are organizing in Montreal on 6th and 7th of December. We are pretty active on internet fracturation or fragmentation issues. We are seeing increasingly governments trying to cut internet when there's a political popular activity, when there's a bit of a revolution movement, when opposition is speaking too loud. And so there are even countries threatening to put complete internet ban. Russia is about to do that as we speak. And so what we are aiming to do is help those people still have access to internet and to communicate with the world, even though they are under national internet bans. And so we will be using the SplinterCon conference in Montreal in December. And mainly what we're going to do at that conference is we're going to invite technology experts and developers, those who know how to circumvent firewalls and internet bans, so that we can try to make a wrap up or like a briefing on all of the ways that we can circumvent these internet threats. And so mainly there is a server operated in Russia right now where the flux is now being redirected to Moscow, which means that people in Ukraine and in those territories are submitted to Moscow censure censorship on what's going on in Ukraine. So what we're trying to do is find some ways to make sure that everybody keeps access to this crucial information. So you are most welcome to join us to this conference. And if you know anybody who's working on these subjects, we would be thrilled to meet with them. Don't hesitate to shoot us some contacts.
And I saw you put some links in the chat as well, so I'll pass it over to you to share how people can get in touch with you and what they should check out.
Yeah, so yeah, I just shared 2 links. So like primarily like right now we run like 2 main flagship projects in South Sudan. One of them, which is actually in South Sudan, is going to with other countries. We run a program called SafetyCom, and I shared a link there to the Twitter profile, and you can find the URL to the website there. So this SafetyCom is like it's like a public. It's one of the only publicly available cyber safety hotline in South Sudan. So we tackle a lot of issues for the public good. So people reach out to us for hacked accounts, impersonation, all kind of cases. It can start from as just simple as someone losing a password and not able to access, but to more complex things like a coordinated attack or inauthentic coordinated behavior or stuff like that. And we've been running this project for 2 years now, 2 years going to 3 years. And we receive hundreds of requests per year, and we kind of reply to them. And we also do outreaches in schools and in a lot of places. The other project is called 211 Check. It's a fact-checking platform. So kind of tackle 2 aspects. Like fact-checking is about kind of verifying information, and cyber safety is kind of offering support. You can find me on Twitter at Nelson Kwaje. Just like kind of a disclaimer, my Twitter is usually really not my professional stuff. So view on memes and stuff like that might be ahead. And I'm also on LinkedIn as at Nelson Kwaje, and you can also check DeFi Head now. A lot of my work also involves collaborating with Meta, the Meta Oversight Board, and also Meta's Trusted Partner Program that is being used to primarily work on addressing critical human rights cases involves Meta platforms in like situation what is happening in the conflict that is happening in Sudan right now, or in Ethiopia and other critical areas. Yeah.
Amazing. I love a good meme, so I'm down for that, and also for the professional stuff on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Nelson. Karine, je pense que vous avez aussi envoyé quelques liens dans le chat pour tout le monde.
Karine, I think you also sent some links. Yes, I just sent you the link for the center where I work. It's a research center made up of social researchers thinking about AI. I won't speak about my works. I'm an academic. We write long, boring articles. You don't need to go and read that. I also sent you the link for Amnesty Tech. I forgot to mention it, but I also collaborate with them on human rights. And so that's it for me. And I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, and I'm very original. So my name is Karine Gentlay. That's all you need to look at. All right, thank you. I loved this conversation. It was so interesting. Everybody had such interesting questions. Our panelists had such interesting content to give us about all of the super actual relevant issues going on right now around us. I love when we can go back home after a webinar and know how we can take action directly. So
our
thank
panelists
you
and
so
everyone
much,
who attended.
everybody.
This was an incredible and very current conversation. You can really take this home, bring it back, and bring it to your organizations as well. So really appreciate all the panelists and the attendees for their thoughtful questions. I also, of course, want to give a shout out to the interpreters, Danielle and Fanny. I was all over the place with French and English, and I don't always appreciate, as someone who's bilingual, how challenging it is to go back and forth. So I really just want to say a huge thank you to both of you for being phenomenal interpreters and making this conversation more accessible in French and English for everyone who's here. And of course, want to give a big shout out to the ICN crew who brought us all here together. It's always a pleasure to work with all of you. So shout out to Solange, Julianette, Mateo for bringing this conversation together. I'll pass it back over to the ICN crew for their final remarks, but big thank you everyone for being here and to all the panelists. This was an incredible conversation.
Thank you, Sydney. On behalf of the ICN, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you, the ICN staff, team, council staff across Canada, panelists, participants, and interpreters for your valuable contribution for today's webinar. I will go also by inviting everyone, if you can, to register to ICN newsletter and social media. And also, we recorded the webinar that will be shared with you later. And also, we would like to have the feedback form completed. And now, my colleague will share the poll for today's webinar, if you can stay on for at least 1 minute. Thank you.